Thank you, and thank you to CRE-MSD for this opportunity to be part of an event on a really exciting topic, a trending topic certainly in our industry. I thought I would kick things off today with my esteemed colleagues here by speaking to the standards landscape as it relates to today's topic. And in particular, I'd like to let you know what the industry contribution has been to that landscape. Now, I have to say, standards and guidelines are not the most riveting material. And in fact, when anyone tells me they have trouble sleeping at night, I often say, pick up a standard, probably help you out. My second reason that it's not the most riveting material, or the second reason it's a bit risky rather, is back to my first point, that even at the best of times, not the most riveting. So what did we just do, right? We had lunch. So thanks, Jack, for the post-lunch dip and the industry panel, and we are forever grateful for that. So regarding standards and guidelines, my proposition to you is that they can be very useful tools on many levels. First and foremost, they actually can be quite educational. You can learn stuff from them, including things like fundamental principles. So before you nod off, if you do happen to pick one up when you're not sleeping at night, you might actually take away one or two little pearls. It depends on which document we're talking about, but broadly speaking, they can be very, very educational. They also certainly provide design guidance to designers and manufacturers of, for example, products and things like sit-stand that we're talking about today. They can be very useful from a procurement perspective if you're in the line to be looking for new product, and oftentimes they can be referenced in tender documents and used as the minimum requirement to qualify a product for your workplace. And they also can be used as evaluation tools, and this can be to evaluate the suitability and safety of a variety of things, including your existing furniture. Now, the relevant standards and guidelines to today's topic come from various what we call standards development organizations. And on your left, you see ISO, and that's familiar. That is the largest the provider of standards in the world, voluntary standards, that is. When we come to North America, we have in Canada, we have CSA, provider of standards, and many of us know all kinds of standards. Then CGSB, I expect not as many of you are familiar with that, and that is the Canadian General Standards Board, and that is a government standards body that writes standards for the government for procuring products and services, whatever the government needs. That's what they develop standards for. BIFMA is our trade association. That's the Business and Institutional and Furniture Manufacturers Association that our companies respectively are all members of, based out of Grand Rapids, North American body, providing market-focused services, including developing standards. And then Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, familiar to many in the room today, the United States Association for Ergonomists and Human Factors Specialists. So here are the documents, not to worry too much about reading the exact titles, but I'll just tell you a little bit about them. These are the particular ones of interest. On the ISO level, 9241 is a multi-part standard that began in the 80s and was continued development through the 90s, and as it continues to be revised, it's gone from something like 17 parts to over 40 parts right now. So it's eternally evolving, and it addresses the workstation layout and postural requirements in the workplace, the two particular parts of 9241, that is part 5 and part 303, one of the newer parts. The CSA Z412, again, I'm sure that's very familiar to many of you, the second one from the left, and that is called a guideline on office ergonomics. From CGSB, there's a series of standards that address furniture. This one in particular is called freestanding office desk products and components. There are others for task seating and panel components in a work environment. Then our BIFMA guideline, which is a guideline about where the furniture goes that supports computer technology in the workplace. And HFES is the human factors engineering of computer workstations. Now, there are similarities among these, and there are some differences. So again, just to go through the documents, from the similarities, they are address the computer workstation furniture. So there is a component in all of these that does address that. The premise is very much the same across the board, which is essentially the more intensive the use, the more importance adhering to what these documents say becomes. And the guiding principles are, for the most part, harmonized. And I give a shout out to ISO, so that's the document on the far left and the oldest, as I mentioned already, where it really set the stage internationally for harmonization with respect to the technical design of computer workstations. And they did that by laying down the guiding principles and design requirements, which have then been picked up by all these other standards bodies as they went about writing their documents. And the third similarity from a design criteria is that they aim to address the 5th to 95th percentile body dimensions, and that is, again, from a design criteria. Now, where they do differ is in terms of the scope. The ISO document is, in addition to the furniture where the computer is, it addresses computer software and computer hardware, and this is why we get so many multiple parts in 9241. CSA scope was focused on, in addition to the actual design of the computer workstation, also inclusive of the other environmental elements in the workplace, so the temperature, the acoustics, indoor air quality, etc. The federal government documents and our BIFMA document are probably the narrowest in scope because they go right to product, go right to the furniture. And the ANSI document addresses, in addition to the furniture, but it also addresses computer hardware. And as a result of these variations in scope, they do differ in, with respect to the intended user groups, the primary intended users, and ISO sort of targeting designers and manufacturers of software, hardware, furniture. The CSA document was really the most layperson document targeting people like many of you in the room today who are, hands on deck trying to deal with the workplace, create the best, safest, healthiest work environments possible. And now all of these also have additional users, but I'm just sort of highlighting who the main user was and the intended user as a document was put together. The CGSB documents are, again, being a government document about buying products and services, it's targeted at those people who are responsible to make those arrangements and pursue the procurement. The BIFMA document, we wrote it, and we wrote it for us. We got together as an industry and we said, hey, you know what? We really need a solid basis from which we can speak to our consumers of our products and tell them what is the basis for our recommendations with respect to workstation design. Now, we made it very educational. So again, back to sleeping at night, having problems, have a look. You may learn, we really were very transparent. We don't just say, here's a bunch of numbers and this is what you should target, 5th to 95th. We say, this is what we did. We went here and we got this data. And this is actually how these body dimensions are measured, by the way. And this is what we did with those numbers. And this is how we came up with our numbers. And here you go. And then the HFES document, the intended users, again, come back to those that are, designing, manufacturing, but also to some extent acquiring products and installing the products. So a little bit of a difference. And they do differ certainly the ones that I have, the pictures right here, the additions that are up here, they do differ in terms of the anthropometric database. I'll call out CSA, for example, the one with the blue cover and the one in the middle. Both of those, the current publications still are based on the 1988 NATIC military data. Now, we don't have time to go on and on and on about all the standards, and so I will let you know that 3 of these are under revision, as you can see on the screen. And the good news is, and I can tell you this confidently, that all of the revision processes for all of these are closer to the end than they are to the beginning. So keep that in mind, and some of the things like the anthropometric database and the selection of which database is chosen from which to make recommendations is certainly part of the conversation. I'm privy to that knowledge. So now I want to turn to our industry guideline, if you don't mind, since it is an industry panel. I just, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, just tell you a little bit more about that in the context of today's topic. And I've pretty much covered off the scope and the intended users. It very much is based on these principles, these ergonomic sound principles laid down in the ISO 9241. And we did adopt the most up-to-date database available, which is the CSER 2002 data that some of you may have heard about. I didn't mention yet, but BIFMA did complete a revision and published in 2013. So of that variety of documents I showed you, it is the most up-to-date publication available right now with respect to the anthropometric data. And essentially what you find in it, after we give you all of this sort of educational experience, if you will, is it boils down to dimensions and adjustment ranges for the product that goes in, that is going to support the workstation. So if you look at the little image on the screen, you will find a main section on the work chair and all the various parameters: seat height, seat width, armrest height, distance between armrests, et cetera, et cetera. You will find the dimensions below surface for the legs and feet when sitting, and also for the feet when you go into a standing posture. You will also find dimensions for input device support surface, and that is both in the seated postures and standing. And I did something myself, just close this down. And the last thing, main thing that you will find is the with respect to monitor placement, based on the top line of the screen, both from seated to standing, and what range to accommodate the largest number of workers. Now, we make it very clear with respect to working postures, absolutely, without a doubt, everything we all know in this room, our users, our workers, they have to keep moving. So we recognize that, and they should be moving through a variety of postures, and we acknowledge that, and these are just some typical ones, and we have, this is a figure that's taken right from our guideline. In terms of the actual numbers that may be of interest to some of you, and with respect to stand, a few of the relevant ones, the input device surface for based on seated elbow height to standing elbow height is 22.6 to 48.7 inches. And this is to accommodate 5th to 95th percentile using the CSER data. The monitor height to the top line of the screen when sitting, again to accommodate 5th to 95th, 43 inches to 54. The monitor height standing, 5th to 95th, 56.8 to 71.4. Now we do include these product evaluation statements. We do say that we are attempting to accommodate 5th to 95th. With these numbers that you will find if you go to the BIFMA document and say, okay, I really want to understand, some seating dimensions, what I should be targeting for our work surfaces, sitting to standing. So that is what we've attempted to do. We also say, we get it. Designing and purchasing furniture for this range, it's not going to work for everybody. And may well be that if you're in purchase mode, you're going to need to step outside of that. And for that reason, for this particular revision, we were, I think this was, a stroke of brilliance, I think, Scott, you will agree, that we decided we would make this even more useful as a document and include percentile tables, which is the data from CSER. So we have made it a step easier for you if you wanted to look at ranges, or if you believe that your users, you have characteristics that would suggest that you might need to differ or vary from a 5th to 95th percentile range. We also have limitations. So, and we publish these. We know that these dimensions in the body dimensions survey, CSER data, I don't know if anybody's ever been measured for an anthropometric survey, but still the ones that we are working with are essentially taken from seated upright postures. And yet, we're also saying, hey, people got to move. So the numbers are based on seated upright and standing postures, but you don't see numbers how they might vary should a person be going through a variety of positions while they are sitting and while they are standing, especially when they're sitting, perhaps as they recline in the chair, is an example of that. So we acknowledge that. That's a limitation when you're looking at these numbers. And we also acknowledge that application of ergo principles is broader than body dimensions and the actual furniture that supports our workers in the workplace. And as a result of the limitations, this was another, I think, stroke of brilliance, Scott. I say that Danian wasn't part of the industry at that time, but I'm sure he totally agrees. The ultimate test for fit, we created this, and it's actually built right into the actual standard, but it's available as a free download. And this is a great, when we talk about, sort of including the user, the participation of the worker in evaluation and making decisions and so on. And this can be a great tool because it puts in words, it takes the numbers out of it. You don't put away your tape measure, you don't really need to do that. But they can help evaluate perhaps existing product and make a decision as to whether or not this is suitably accommodating them in terms of maintaining neutral joint angles, of following all the ISO principles as they go about doing their work. And it's deemed that if you meet these statements, for example, if they're sitting, their input device height, they've got neutral joint angles in their upper body, and they're starting from the feet on the floor, of course, and they can still move through postures. If they can achieve that, then they're deemed to meet the essence of the principles, and although the numerics to support them are maybe different than what's in the guideline, that they are deemed to meet really what the essence of having a guideline is in the first place, which is to try to, accommodate our humans as best we possibly can. And just a reminder, it is available as a free download. So in summary, I just come back to my original proposition that I do believe standards and guidelines, they certainly can be very useful, and on a number of levels, and not the least of which is to provide guidance on the furniture characteristics that will support not only our users, but the work they are doing and the equipment and the materials they need to do that work. And I would just add sort of my little graphic. It just supports a lot of what we've seen, a lot of what you're doing, that it's really important as we try to develop programs and policies around sit, stand in the workplace, that we really do understand our needs up front. And I was reflecting on the case study where, not knowing what the right questions are to ask, but there's something really critical that's got to happen right up front before we go down these roads. So we need to understand these needs, get those questions answered, and then design and select accordingly. And as Michelle well presented, once again, this education and training and how key it is. Like, we're in a business that makes stuff that's inanimate objects. In and of itself, not going to do a whole lot for you. So there is so much that has to be invested in the need to support these purchases, and that, to me, it's more than half of that whole decision. Is, are we going to commit to and integrate a program to properly educate and on an ongoing basis keep our workers engaged in this, so that we do get the return on investment. And of course, always form of measurement, whether it's lagging or leading indicators, so that you can ensure that your program objectives are being met. So I'll leave it there. I thank you and hand it over to Scott.